He is Brian Broaddus, the Super Bowl winning scout. I'm Eric Chiafalo of the G-Bag Nation. Welcome into another episode of the Love of the Star podcast. Great to have you in as we start to ramp up the off-season workouts, the OTAs. Brian Broaddus, we got plenty to address in Cowboys land. How the heck are you?
Doing well, Eric. Thank you. You mentioned this. This is kind of the last thing that the team is going to do until you take that 4-week break off between the OTAs and training camp, and then you have the early game, by a few days with Thursday night football. But yeah, these are the things that you kind of look forward to with the whole team together. Now they've been working. This will be the first opportunity that, as the media, that we've been able to see these guys practice all together. Before that, it was just rookies by themselves. So be a little bit exciting to see where, in fact, that the coaches decide to line these guys up and, get this a little idea of maybe what they're thinking about them initially.
Yeah, I mean, this is an offseason filled with a lot of new acquisitions from coaching staff to personnel. So I think this is a super exciting time to just start to get a glimpse into what their plan is on both sides of the ball, and specifically with certain individuals and how they plan on using them. So I'm fired up for this. I mean, obviously you're the football man. Like what are you, from a priority standpoint, what has you most excited, and what are you hoping to see?
Yeah, I don't know how much competitive football you're really going to see. Now maybe you'll see them go through. Now, it's been different from all the administrations that I've been through, whether, there was the Bill Parcells administration that I was part of, even going back before that, with Dave Campo and stuff. Every coach kind of practiced differently. And now you'll get a little bit of an idea of how maybe the practice will be structured, at least initially, for Brian Schottenheimer. I as a personnel guy, you kind of have an idea of like, okay, I think I know what this coach is going to do, but then you'll see the pace of the practice. You'll see the guys moving around from drill to drill. There's just things that will give you some subtle clues into maybe what we can look forward to when we get to Oxnard, where the pads will come on. It'll be more intense, but at least you'll get an idea about the things, the stretching aspect of things, the individual periods, the length of the individual periods. Is there more individual periods? Is there more team periods? Is there more competitive periods? We really, under the Mike McCarthy, it just seemed like there weren't. I'll say this: Jason Garrett is as much problems as I had with Jason Garrett, and I've admitted that. I made that more personal than anything, which is probably wrong on my part, but the one thing that I did respect about Jason Garrett is his ability to evaluate players. I would have loved to have worked with him with his eye on talent. I did get to work with his dad. But the thing is that Jason Garrett had competitive practices, and that was a big part of his belief. And maybe that's coming from where he learned from Jimmy Johnson. Going back and watching Cowboys practices when I was involved with the World League, very competitive practices, with Jimmy Johnson, those days in Austin at training camp, very physical practices. And Jason Garrett kind of brought that up to, when he was the head coach. And then now we go through the Mike McCarthy administration, and there weren't as many competitive practices. There weren't as many, one-on-one where coach calling out two individuals and then let them go at it. They had the mojo moments. Remember those? They play the song, let's, the NBC sounder, and next thing you know, we're having a goal line period and all. But there weren't as many of those as there were, like under the Jason Garrett administration. So as a scout, you really have a hard time evaluating your team at practice when we talk about the good on good. I'm interested to see where Brian Schottenheimer takes this. Where does he fall? Does he fall more into the Mike McCarthy realm of things, or is he going to fall into where his father was, a very, very physical practice type of a coach?
Yeah, and I would have to imagine, I mean, my guess would be he wants to lean a little bit more like the old school,
I think so
getting
too.
after it quite a bit. But obviously this is such an early portion, and when you have new personnel and new coaching staff, this is probably a lot of installation and just trying to get everybody on the same page before you can hopefully take off and really hit the ground running once you get to Oxnard in training camp. But when it comes to certain individuals, the Micah Parsons of the world, obviously the George Pickens of the world, you have the rookies who I mean, how much do you expect to see Micah?
I really don't. I think the Cowboys are actually preparing, and when this gets posted, maybe we have already had the practice and all that. I'm sure Peyton will get it up as quickly as possible, but just initially, I don't think you're going to see much. I don't think the Cowboys are expecting Micah Parsons to be a part of these on the field workouts. So take that for what it's Micah has to make a decision, and he has to feel like he needs to protect himself. I was part of a practice one time where I saw Sean Lee get hurt going against Zach Martin. Zach Martin's very first year, and I saw on a screen pass going out to the right, Zach Martin got hooked up with Sean Lee, and next thing Sean Lee's laying on the turf with a knee injury. So you have to think about these things, if you're looking at the contract situation the way it is for Micah Parsons. Will he be around? We'll see about that. I don't know that, but I just got the feeling that the staff is not preparing for him to be part of the on-field activities.
Okay, and this is still the voluntary portion of the proceedings, correct?
Yeah, the OTAs, there's some mandatory, like there's the OTAs, the mini camps, there's mandatory parts of it that, we will get into. I know the media will be allowed to see one a week, and their schedule goes through the middle of June. So, yeah, there's going to be a point of this where it becomes a 3-day mandatory thing, and they'll work from there. But like I said, early indications, and I haven't talked to Micah about this, but I think the staff is preparing that he is not going to be there.
That's interesting because it feels like the Joneses have kind of laid the groundwork for what they want to see this offseason from a leadership standpoint out of Micah before they hand him the fatty boomba inevitable market-setting deal as one of the best edge rushers in the sport. And so I wonder how that lands with Jerry and Steven and these guys. I mean, ultimately, we know how the Cowboys end up doing business, and Mike is he's gonna get the bag. It's just a matter of when, not if. But they've kind of made it seem like, hey, we want to see what type of, how all in are you as an individual and being the leader. There's no DeMarcus Lawrence anymore. Like we're looking at you, Micah, to sort of be that guy. And he's been a guy that's perpetually kind of been distant in off seasons. He's been working, but he's getting his own individual work in and not necessarily with the team. And it felt like they sort of set the bar for, hey, we're going to end up giving you this contract. We want to see the leadership aspect out of you. I understand the business side of things, and you bring up the Sean Lee stuff where, I mean, there's certainly a chance something could happen here. It happens.
Yeah.
So I get Micah and his agent being like, hey, we don't want to push it too much, but I just wonder how the Joneses, how they feel about that, even though we all know they're going to still give him the deal.
Yeah. I don't think anybody feels great about anything about players not participating in things that, the team tries to put together, whether that's Diggs with the rehab away from Britt Brown and those guys, but this is the business side of things. And all you have to do is just cite the conversation that you and I just had, the Sean Lee, that it happens. We have guys getting hurt. I think the Ravens the other day lost their safety. Washington to a knee injury, happened during camp, these mini camps, OTA camps. And so injury is part of the game. And, heck, it's just, it's one of those things where you have to be very mindful of that. Let's go back to the first knee injury that Diggs had was a practice injury, that he was lost in, the third week of September, in 2023. So, these things do happen, and these players have to be very mindful of that. And they're like, listen, do I want to put myself in harm's way, when I don't have a contract done or I'm currently negotiating a contract? I think the Joneses, you asked the question, I think the Joneses have to understand, and I do believe they do. I do believe they understand. They want Micah to be the leader. They want Micah to do the things that, that Dak Prescott, but nobody's going to be Dak Prescott here. Nobody is going to be that guy. But it would be nice, and I'm sure Michael will be around. But this is one of those times where I think that they would really understand that, listen, practicing might not be as much as they want him to do it. It might not be for the best interest of him.
I'm glad you brought up Dak. How much participation will be able to get out of him physically.
I think, yeah, it sounds like just kind of talking to some people in the building that things have been going along really well. The times that, and I'm no trainer by any means, know a lot of them, know a lot of doctors, but they, walking by the windows, going to the podcast studio, at the Star, you could see Dak out there working with Britt Brown, and you could see, it looks like to me, just if you have a hamstring problem, you're not doing track exercises. We've seen these track performers, athletes, and their ability to skip and bounce. And, if you're having hamstring problems, you're not skipping and bouncing around like Dak Prescott was when I went walking by that field. That's a little bit of you're maybe a little bit more cautious and all that, but boy, he looked physically, he looked good. Weight wise, Dak is always, since his first year, I think every year Dak's made it a point to come in in the best shape that he could be, and physically, weight wise and stuff. So, he looks good. The skipping around, jumping around, everything looks fine. But it sounds like that he is going to participate in this camp.
That's great news because, like we said, with the new coaching staff and implementing the new offense and things like that, you obviously want Dak to be as much of a participant as possible. I'm also excited to see, Joe Milton and how he looks out there, how he spins it. I can't wait to get out to Oxnard to see it, but that's another guy I'm looking forward to watching. Anybody else on the short list for you that you're going to have your eye on as we get going here?
Well, I'm interested to see with all the edge rushers where Azaraku falls into play here. Is he getting work with the second unit? I would hope that, that he is in competition with Fowler and Sam Williams, and those are the kinds of things. I think that's where I'd want to see. I don't really want to see any of these rookies not being, especially the ones like the Bookers, and don't and Vach Lombardi and I get on this all the time. Don't be the guy or the coach that puts Booker over on field 2 and says, oh, he's getting work with the 3s and 4s. No, he needs to be over there working with the 1s and the 2s. And, you drafted him 12th overall. He is going to be your starter at right guard unless something awful happens. He is exactly what you need playing right guard. And so put him at right guard and let him go. Don't be, well, he's getting more work over there. I don't need to see that, at least like we'll see where he lines up with the OTAs, the mini camps and stuff like that. I hope that all these rookies are going to be in places where they can immediately impact practice, whether it's an OTA mini camp or a training camp practice, and then a preseason game, and then into the regular season. I don't need to see somebody, having, we're going to put him over here, unless the player's not ready, unless that player's just not ready. I'm interested to see with the cornerbacks out there and how they line up, with Carson. Ravel, I don't think will be OTAing or mini camping. Now, training camping, there's a really good possibility of that. But I know talking to people over there, they're excited about working with the kid. But I just want to see where these corners are going to line up, how they maybe are going to look at him initially here, and then maybe get an idea of how they could do it once some guys start to come back and play.
Yeah, that's a great point. The Kalen Carson stuff coming in now in year 2 off
needs to be there. Needs to be ready. Him, Butler, these guys, these young guys, they're might be a little thin there right now. It looks thin. It looks like a thin position, but maybe you do get a couple of guys. Like I say, Butler did a nice job until he got nicked up, and then we saw some of the others. But Carson needs to step up for you. He absolutely needs to. There was, this time last year, if you and I were doing this show together, I would be this guy that was cheerleading for him, what I saw from him at Wake Forest. And, wow, he could be a guy that maybe could compete with Jordan Lewis at the nickel spot and they'll make Jordan Lewis like a dime player. That just never materialized. Jordan Lewis was one of your best damn corners, so we'll see how these corners all shake out. But I am totally interested in not only the rookies, but the second year guys that have, and even the third year guy, Amazi Smith. With new additions at defensive tackle, does this light a fire under Amazi Smith, or is he just going to be a player that's going to be good and not potentially great.
You're listening to the Love of the Star podcast. Love of the Star is an Audacy podcast. You can find it on the Audacy app or wherever you get your podcasts. Broadus, I want to stay right there with the corners because I find it pretty funny, the disconnect here from what I believe to be the thoughts of the training staff and the Joneses compared to the way Trayvon Diggs views his rehab process for his previous injury in the ACL. That's been pretty well documented that they didn't love the way that he went and attacked the ACL rehab last year. But I'm seeing on Twitter a tweet from last night coming from Trayvon Diggs saying that he says, my ACL rehab journey was very successful. He says, I ended up coming back to play 2 months sooner than I was supposed to. And he says, you can follow my journey as I give you direct insight on how I did just that. Thankful for everyone who played a role with getting back out there. Episode 1 out now on YouTube. So he has chronicled his journey coming back from the ACL. He is very proud of the way he attacked it. And I remember Jerry Jones very recently at the microphone saying like, hey, Trayvon, hopefully he's going to actually attack this offseason's rehab with the injury, unlike the way he did it last year. This is just hilarious. And he's posting videos now of his rehab. Yeah. I think he's just trying to like prove to Cowboys fans like, hey, I actually am trying to get this thing back. But the disconnect between the way he views the way he attacked his rehab compared to the way everybody else in the organization feels is pretty hilarious.
Yeah. And, and hey, tip of the cap to the kid for this. He understands the power of social media. I mean, I YouTube pages and stuff, that's exciting. I love working with YouTube and things like that. So, but the journey, the fact that Jerry Jones said what he said about the rehab is all you need to know. This was a conversation that you and I had on various platforms we were on, whether it was our own show on 105.3 The Fan, the G-Bag Nation, we talked about that there were whispers from the organization that the rehab was not going great and that he wasn't attacking it. And, and all of a sudden you get more and more clips like, oh, look, he's working. He's, this is all a bunch of BS and all that. Folks, this is not me making it up. Your owner, general manager, president, whatever you want to call him, he called him out for it. This is legitimate stuff, and does Britt Brown want to be working with every single injured player that he can to try and get him ready? Yes, absolutely he does. I worked with Britt for 14 years. He's very, very good at his job. I know these people talk about, the Cowboys training staff was this and that, and that athletic survey that's one of the lowest. They don't have enough trainers over there. That's the problem. They've got really, really good trainers, but they need to get more of them, and they're looking into that. But, Britt Brown is one of the best in the National Football League when it comes to getting players back on the field. Look what he's done with Dak Prescott. Look at who he did with Overshown. There's countless numbers of players that have gotten back on the field and ready to play because of the work those trainers do over there. And the fact that, I don't see Diggs being able to like film the workouts and be able to chronicle his journey working with Britt Brown. That's just, that's not what they're going to do. And so him working with somebody, I watched the video. I think it was Laws Nation that put it out last night that, I saw the clip of it and I'm like, wow, okay, well, that's good. Looks like, oh, wait, he pivoted to his left there. Well, it doesn't look like he's really pushing off that left knee all that well. There's not the explosiveness, the feet, the footwork, all that seems fine, the pedaling fine. But just the pushing off, you could tell there's a little hitch there. Again, I'm not a doctor. I'm just watching footwork. So does this doctor who he's working with, a trainer, physicist, whatever, physical therapy guy, whatever, I'm sure he feels comfortable, and I guarantee the Cowboys would love for him to be working with Britt Brown all the time, like other people have done and have come back very successfully from it. So, that's the sad thing. But these players, and I'm sure people out there screaming at me right now, listen to this. Players do have rights. 20 years ago, when I was working in the league, or 25 years ago, Philadelphia, in those times, we had we had players that went and got surgeries with other doctors, whether it was Dr. Andrews down in Birmingham, Dr. McKenzie in Green Bay, Dr. Cooper in Dallas. Those guys were going to other places to get. There was a famous surgeon down in Miami that was doing knee surgeries. And these players were like, that was kind of a big thing. Like, whoa, wait a minute. You don't want our doctor to do the surgery? That was a big thing. But today it's a little bit more like, okay, because a lot of these superstar athletes have their own training staffs. They spend the millions of dollars to have their own people do work on them. Does it make the Cowboys happy? No. But do they have to work through it? Yes. So here we are.
So what's the plan for him in terms of, like, is he going to end up on the PUP list? Is he going physically?
I think he's going to start on PUP. Yeah, I think he's going to start on the PUP list, and they're going to see how it goes from there. Is really what and the more I talk to people, they don't really have a timetable, and you can't really have a timetable if you're not working with the guy. So that's, they're able to say, hey, I feel like that Ravel will be back this day or this time. With Diggs, they can't really give you a timetable because they, haven't done the work together. And maybe we're going to get the work together here pretty soon. But like I said, it's tough. The players have rights. The team wants to work their guy out, and they're paying this player to be on the field. In the last couple of years, Diggs was not on the field in 2023. In week 11 last year, he stopped being on the field for him last year. So that's, those are the things we need to kind of focus on.
Well, on a positive note, I am looking forward to the way this offensive line looks. I mean, we've talked about it, the optimism with bringing in Connor Riley from K-State, reuniting with Cooper Beebe, Clayton Adams, the OC from Arizona, who has an extensive offensive line background. And these guys are clearly good friends. Like, you see them at the Stars game and they're having themselves a good time together. They're cheering on the Dallas Stars right now, going on a postseason run. Cooper Beebe's taking his shirt off. He's getting hyped up. Tyler Guyton, Tyler Booker. These guys clearly, they're forming that bond, and the unit of the offensive line, I think, is very, very important. I saw Tyler Guyton at the game, and I can't believe how lean he is. I can't believe he's a 315, 320 pounder for as lean as he looks.
Yeah.
It's pretty unbelievable, but I'm optimistic that he's going to step in year two. It wasn't like he was just a turnstile garbage player last year. I thought they did a poor job in just not getting him enough reps. That's a guy who needs a ton of reps. He didn't get a bunch in college. He was a right tackle player. Now he's playing on the left side. I think when you start talking about last year's biggest regrets, I think it's the way they handled Tyler Guyton. But I am hopeful with the new coaching staff and obviously bringing in Tyler Booker, fortifying this offensive line. Hopefully Terrence Steele gets back to being himself there on the right side as well. But I'm optimistic about this offensive line. I'm hopeful for Tyler Guyton, but I feel like even if, unfortunately, Guyton doesn't really click for him, I think they've done enough on the offensive line when it comes to the guard depth. Like, I'm not worried about the offensive line really, because if Tyler Guyton doesn't pan out, I'm like, dude, Tyler Smith becomes your left tackle, and you have an influx of guards that could replace Tyler Smith at left guard. You brought in Robert Jones from Miami, who's really a left side player. He's a guy who can start for you. You have the Hoffmans and the Basses of the world. You have Awesome Richards, and heck, maybe Awesome Richards would be the guy that would replace Tyler Guyton at left tackle. But I think one of the biggest questions about the Cowboys after last season was, man, you've got to get this offensive line right, especially with the status of Dak now and how he is physically, maybe not quite as mobile. You've got to fortify that thing. And I think with the coaching staff, that was the first check off the box. Man, they did it with Riley and Adams. And then you have the influx of all these guards. You draft Tyler Booker. I think there's no way that this offensive line, unless they get decimated with injuries, I think one way or another, whether it's Tyler Guyton at left tackle, Tyler Smith at left tackle, Awesome Richards at left tackle, I think they have enough to where this offensive line is going to be pretty fantastic.
Well, fantastic is a strong word.
You're right. That's an overstatement. Let me correct that and just say they're not going to be awful.
No, that's fair. And that's, and I think that you walked us through exactly the thought process here. Tyler Booker is the total opposite of Tyler Guyton when it comes to being able, the number of games that Tyler Booker played at Alabama was impressive. The number of big games he played in was impressive. He will be ready to play. You plug him in, you let him play. He will be ready. The learning curve will not be small for him. He will be ready to go. I have no doubt about that in my mind. The thing with Guyton is, there were some flashes last year when we saw Guyton, some of my own observations from training camp practices were him and Micah Parsons and him being able to hold his own against Micah Parsons. That gave me a lot of encouragement. Now, we go through the training camp practices, all of a sudden the Rams show up, and now he's going against Verse from the Rams. And Verse, I'm thinking, holy geez. This kid, I saw him on tape at Florida State. My gosh, he's a problem. But he not only was a problem for Guyton, he was a problem for the whole NFL, So, you were thinking, man, this rookie beating up on another rookie, that's not a good thing. But then you watch Verse play, and you're like, okay, he did that to veteran tackles as well. They need Guyton, though, to step up. They need him to actually Eric, he's a lean-built guy. You're right. Long-limbed. There's not a lot of body fat on him. I think it's going to be difficult for him to be strong. I think he's always going to be an athletic tackle. I don't think he's ever going to be a strong tackle, but he's got to play with technique. He's got to get his feet. He's got to get his hands right. He can't be leaning on people. He can't get pulled out of his stance and stuff. So here we are, another line coach, another opportunity. A lot of these guys, you could say that about Mozzie Smith. How many defensive line coaches has he gone through now? How many, this offensive line, hopefully they got this thing right for years to come, because that offensive line group has gone through now 3 offensive line coaches, since, we go back to Joe Philbin and Mike Solari, and now two guys that are offensive line coaches, 2 guys, 2 new offensive line coaches. So these guys have got to find a way to put it together. I just don't ever think that Tyler Guyton is going to be a strong, physical offensive tackle. I think he's going to be a very athletic one. Let's see if that athletic ability can hold up with hands and feet and keep him in position and make these blocks. Because if it doesn't, they're going to have to do something else at left tackle.
Now, Broadus, Will McClay has been making some rounds with the media, talking about a multitude of things, but especially George Pickens. And I mean, he's going out of his way to credit Jerry Jones and Brian Schottenheimer for pushing it and making sure that they stayed on top of the George Pickens trade. Obviously, with something they were talking about and lead up to the draft, throughout the draft, and then the trade goes down after the draft. And so, I mean, we know Jerry Jones is a guy that loves trading for a wide receiver. That's no surprise. But I do love to hear that Brian Schottenheimer, despite his desire to have an influx of character guys, captains, leadership, we saw that with the draft class. That was very important, even to some extent with the free agent class, Solomon Thomas and guys like that, bringing them in and the certain type of dudes that he wants. But George Pickens doesn't really fit that bill. And I love that Brian Schottenheimer's like, yes, of course, we want to have the character guys. We want to have the leadership and that kind of deal as we start this new era and building the foundation for what is going to be our new culture. But then he's also going, hey, talent also matters, and you need to have a little bit of that super highly competitive dog mentality type guys. That is George Pickens. So would love your thoughts on that. And then what do we know about the George Pickens jersey number? Because that's been a huge topic. Marquise Bell has the 14 that he wore with the Steelers. Jalen Tolbert has the number 1 that he wore in college. What are we doing with the George Pickens number?
Well, currently he's wearing 13, and that's what he'll be on the practice field today and into the future. I think he's open to, I think just talking to some people in the organization that Bell would be open to moving to a single-digit number. They just don't have a single-digit number for him to move to. The number 8 is a number that they use they have. But of course, that's Troy Aikman. There's a couple of numbers they don't like to dress people in. They don't like to put people in 8. They don't like to put people in 12 if they can avoid it. And 74 seems to be one they don't like to put. So there's kind of a number. But right now, Pickens is going to wear 13. We'll see if him and Bell can work something out. I know that talking to some people over in the pro shop area and stuff like that, boy, they are really anxious to start selling some of these Pickens jerseys. And, if you don't have a legitimate, if he's waiting on a number, they're still having discussions about the number. Well, that's where he's going to be at right now. So just kind of waiting. You'll see if they can somehow a single digit comes available for Bell to take. And if he takes that, then Pickens can get his 14. If not, then we'll see if Pickens, in fact, just keeps the 13 and going forward.
Well, we know Dak Prescott likes to throw to that number 13 with all those Michael Gallup years. So that can make some sense. I get it. But, I think at some point, I'm looking at Jalen Tolbert like, dude, you got to punt on that number 1. You don't deserve that number 1. Give George back his college number and let him go be a beast there. Let him rep that with the pride and the honor that the number 1 brings. But all right, there it is. Let's go ahead and get to the mailbag. You're listening to the Love of the Star podcast. Love of the Star is an Audacy podcast. You can find it on the Audacy app or wherever you get your podcasts. Dean, Julia, mailbag time, Mr. Broaddus. We got some great questions today from our fantastic listeners here. We're going to start with a good one. I'm excited to flesh this out with you a little bit. This is from JD on Twitter, and he asked the question, do you think the offense this year looks closer to what we saw from Dallas in years past? Or do you expect this to look more like maybe some of the offenses that we've always admired over the last few years, like a McVay, a Shanahan, that type of offense? What do you think in terms of what the strategy is here? Because I know sometimes you get this desire to not want to change too much. Like, hey, Dak's done certain things well his whole career, and we don't want to change too much there because Dak enjoys certain things. But I'm of the mindset that you need to have a clean sweep of what this offense has been for the last decade, basically, and have an influx of new cutting edge off. I'm encouraged with the staff that they put together with Adams and Riley. We've talked about it plenty. Even the Schottenheimer vision that he laid out and what he wants for his offense. So I'm hopeful that it's going to look different. But what do you think?
I think in some areas it's going to look different. And I'll tell you this, because here's the influence. Schottenheimer has his idea. He knows what Dak is comfortable with and is good at. But here we go. You're right. You've got maybe an Indianapolis Colts and then a Arizona Cardinal influence. You have a Kansas State college approach from the offensive line coach. The quarterback coach was an offensive coordinator at Boston College. We talked about Schottenheimer, the Cowboys, and what he knows. The wide receiver coach is from Oregon, And then you got Lunda Wells, who falls into the Schottenheimer category of the Dallas influence. You can't tell me that you're going to have those many different schemes and ideas and not come up with different things. There are going to be times in that meeting where Coach Adams is going to step up and say something, and the next thing you know, your quarterback coach is going to say something, and it's going to say, well, what about if we do it this way? What do we think about running it that way? What if we play with more of a condensed formation and do it this way? I think it's going to look different. I do. I think there's elements of it that they will keep, that they like because of Dak Prescott's ability. There's no question with that. But you just can't tell me that they're going to roll the same offense out there with, how I mentioned, Arizona, Indianapolis influence, Kansas State influence, Boston College influence, and Oregon influence. You can't convince me. There's going to be different ideas the way this offense attacks. But what we also learned from talking to the coaches is they are not going to try and do things that their players can't do. We learned that day 3 of the draft, talking with the coordinator, the line coach. We learned that. Hey, listen, pin and pull. Do you look at the pin and pull guys and on? Well, if we can't pin and pull, we don't have players for pin and pull, we're not going to pin and pull. They said that. So, I think they had an idea of things they wanted to do. I think there's some elements you're going to see. But with this many different influences offensively, I think you're going to see some different things.
Yeah, I think that's where it starts with being encouraged that this is going to look different. Schottenheimer could have easily just gone back into the old recycled coach guys that I've been with throughout my time in the NFL, and we're going to do what we've always done offensively. But as you mentioned, the influx of a wide variety of different coaches from different backgrounds coming in here, I think they want to pivot to what Schottenheimer and what the Cowboys have done for so many years, and that's super encouraging. You mentioned the condensed formations. I think that's something that's big when you talk about a McVay or a Shanahan, those guys bringing the receivers closer to the line of scrimmage, bunch formations, doing things schematically to help create separation for your wide receivers. We've lamented that for years, that Cowboys wide receivers don't generate a ton of separation. Well, they're not getting much help from the play caller and the scheme. Concepts. So hopefully less stationary routes where guys are just running and turning around. Hopefully more guys on the move. You get the rub routes and the pick routes and things like that. I think that's going to help a ton. Obviously, the addition of George Pickens is going to be big because now you have an offense where you have a 1A, 1B at wide receiver, and defenses are going to have to sort of pick their poison there. But then when it comes to the rushing attack, like having a much more varied rushing attack, you mentioned they may have some things they would like to do, but maybe their personnel doesn't allow for it, and that's fine. But bringing in the motion and a wide variety rushing attack, I think, is going to be hugely important. And then, of course, the play action passing game. And Schottenheimer has hammered that home at the microphone when he's got the opportunity, bringing back more play action where Dak has thrived in his career. I think all of those elements are going to be extremely important. The motion at the snap, all the different things, the eye candy to help leverage the defense in your favor offensively. All of those things, I think, are on the table now, and I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic. You never know until you actually see it firsthand, but that's probably the number one thing I'm most excited about going into this season is just finally seeing something new offensively, and we haven't gotten that in – I mean, geez, Broadus, how long has it been since we've had that, dude? You go from Garrett and Linehan to Kellen Moore and Mike McCarthy, and it's just been nothing but the same. I cannot wait to see what they have up their sleeve here.
I think we also can focus on the vertical game too. When you start to talk about Pickens,
absolutely,
that will be an element that we've seen Dak have some success, and now with Pickens, you get even more of that. So that's a positive to me.
Okay, we continue here in the Dean Julia mailbag. Mike Baines at Cowboys Weekly on Twitter. Broadus, he wants to talk about the safety. How are you seeing the depth chart play out there to start the season and any predicted changes during the season? We have a couple of questions about the safeties. Robert DiCenzo asking, could Thomas and Bell, Wanye Thomas, Marquise Bell, be the starters at safety this season in place of Malik Hooker and Donovan Wilson?
I think talking to Mike Zimmer preseason last year, we got that opportunity to visit with him, and I think Mike was really on board with Wilson and he was on board with Hooker. And I think he wanted to ride that. And he, the year before, Bell had a year where he had played so much in the box, and I feel like that Wanye Thomas is one of the better cover safeties you got on your roster. And so, we'll see how it all plays out for them with the new regime in there. Maybe that Matt Eberflus is not completely sold like Mike Zimmer was sold on Hooker and Wilson, and maybe the previous regime too. Even when you talk about Dan Quinn, they really, really like that pairing as well. So I kind of feel like that this thing is a little bit more wide open, and if there's an opportunity where where Thomas and Bell can play a little bit more of a role and maybe unseat a current starter, I think that's an absolute possibility. I think if you're going to look at for someone's spot, I would maybe focus on Wilson's spot a little bit more there with the amount of money. Do you have, is there some type of cap savings there if in fact that, he's not able to answer the bell like you want him to? So the safety position is something I've always looked at. And I went through this draft trying to find ways to get safeties here. When we were doing the draft shows and things like that, I talked a lot about Makuba and people like that, and here's Makuba ends up with the Eagles, and I'm like, oh damn it, they get rid of their safety, Gardner Johnson, who last year Blankenship, Gardner Johnson, the majority of interceptions were with those guys. But what did they do? They got rid of Gardner Johnson and they drafted one of my favorite safeties in the draft. think they got better there. I wish Dallas would have thought the same way. Just didn't get the opportunity to play that way for him, though.
We're getting a lot of questions about Trayvon Diggs, but I think we kicked that around pretty good earlier.
Yeah, we did.
In the program.
We did.
We got some questions about the running backs. Do we believe that the running backs on this roster, is this what it's going to look like day one? Do you have any hope that they're going to try and bring in maybe another veteran after some June 1 cuts or preseason cuts or anything like that? Yeah,
I think that, to me, I think June 1 is the opportunity for a lot of different positions, whether it's a tackle, running back. If they see an opportunity, I do believe them when they're saying this after the way they conducted this offseason. I really do believe they're looking at June 1s. And, maybe they don't want to, maybe, the fact that they traded for Pickens is the way that worked out. That was a bold move, a good move. But the June 1 will maybe bring some opportunities here after the OTAs, mini camps, when people are going into their off seasons. If somebody all of a sudden is like, "Oh, so we're going to have to move on from this guy," I think they're open for business for that. Just talking to people about the running back situation right now, it appeared that they were done. But I think June 1, if something comes available, and I say this regardless of what position, if it makes sense for them, I think they're in. I think they want to finish this thing off strong. If there's one more piece or two more pieces they can add due to a June 1 where they don't have to give up a draft pick, I think that they're on board with that.
Thank you, Cardenas 2097, for the running back question. Brian Sherrill asking about some injury stuff. We already addressed Dak and Diggs, but DeMarvion Overshown, don't expect him to be ready for OTAs. No. And that's a guy that we don't expect to see until probably around Thanksgiving time. Now, he's super optimistic. He's Mr. Positive on Twitter. We know he's a guy that attacks rehab like a maniac, and we appreciate the professionalism there for DeMarvion Overshown. So going to be a while before we see him, but obviously cannot wait to get him back on the field. He's a total game changer. And then the last question here, Mike Brownson wants to know, under the new regime offensively, will Dak have more or less or the same leeway to call and change plays? Is that a good or bad thing if he doesn't? I guess that sort of remains to be seen. Maybe you have a thought on that, Broadus.
I really don't. I think that I do feel like that there's a mutual respect between Brian Schottenheimer and Dak Prescott. I think that if Dak sees fit, I think Dak is going to be game plan ready on a weekly basis. He's usually prepared. The interceptions tend to come when he doesn't see a guy. Maybe that's something pre-snap that you worry about a little bit, but doesn't always happen. But that or tip ball, that's So you kind of worry like, oh, is he throwing interceptions because he's not seeing it? Well, he loses guys. Quarterbacks lose guys and drops sometimes. But I think overall, I think Brian Schottenheimer has the utmost confidence in Dak Prescott's ability to stand at the line of scrimmage and be able to get them in the right protection and get the ball to the right person. And I don't think there's any holding back on that. I don't think there's anything that I've seen over the years that make me feel like that Dak Prescott can't change plays. Now, if it's a situation where like he's doing exactly what his coach is asking, like running the ball when he could have changed it, but I think he'll have the latitude and the leeway to do what he needs to do to get him in and out of the right plays.
Yeah, I mean, Dak will know this offense inside and out, especially as the season goes on. And when you hear quarterbacks, guys like Aaron Rodgers around the league, have the utmost respect for Dak at the line of scrimmage from a pre-snap standpoint. So I don't see that changing at all. No. But especially as the season goes on and the more comfort that he gets within the offense, I would imagine that would be par for the course of what it's always been like for him. All right, that'll do it for today's episode and the Dean Julia mailbag. Thank you, Brian Broadus, Super Bowl winning scout. You're an absolute beast. And thank you to all the great questions from our fantastic listeners. We'll be back in the coming days with an OTA recap. Until then, ladies and gentlemen, be well.